Welcome to the next video in the Sage Intacct Inventory Configuration and Workflow series. In this session, we're going to go specifically through the inventory configuration screen, and we're going to touch on warehouses, and we'll go through how to set one up. And let's just dive right in. So with the initial configuration, you want to make sure you're at the top level, and under Applications, you're going to want to go into Inventory Control on your Applications screen. If you don't see inventory on your menu, you want to make sure you check your security to make sure you have security to see the inventory module. And also, if not, you want to check in your subscriptions to make sure the inventory subscription is turned on. And that's going to be under Company at Admin Subscriptions. And you'll need to be a full admin visit user to go into this screen. But when you scroll down here, you will see an option for inventory control. You want to make sure that's configured and enabled. So in this instance, I have this enabled. So we're going to go into inventory control under setup. And just like the purchasing and order entry module, we're going to go through the configuration first. So let's click on configuration. Now, as we go through this screen, I'm not going to be able to touch on every button that's in this section here. But as always, if there is a feature functionality you're curious about and want to learn more about, once you're in this page, go over to the right and click on Help and Support, Help on this page. And you're going to get a listing of every field that is in the configuration screen. So I can scroll down here and I can get to the accounting section and I can follow along with the different methods here. So we'll try and touch on as much as we can, but if not, this is available as well. So I'm going to close this screen. And we're going to go through just like we did in the other modules. It's going to look very similar to the purchasing and order entry screens in the configuration. We're going to leave the workflow set up. You should be on advanced workflow with your construction edition already. And the first section we're going to be into is accounting. And in here is where you're first going to define your default inventory costing method. So within Intacct, you're going to be able to do a standard cost, average, FIFO, or LIFO. And you can establish your default method here. And then you can also enable multiple costing methods. So basically what this means is when you set up an inventory item in the system, if that particular inventory item has a need to be a different costing method than your default method here, it needs to be a FIFO or LIFO, you can enable multiple costing methods. And this way you'll be able to change the costing method per inventory item. If that doesn't pertain to you and you are all the way through the same costing method, let's say FIFO, LIFO, you could select it here and then you would just disable that multiple and nobody would be able to change that. Now, one of the things you can do is later on in the configuration section, there is some entity specific configurations you can do in here. And one of them is the costing method. And you could change that based on entity. So if you go back in by entity and then you come into here, you'll be able to make one specific for each one of your companies if that's different. In one of the subsequent sessions, we're going to touch on inventory valuation in more detail, but this is basically how you want that to run. And we'll skip over this for now, but we'll come back into it in the inventory valuation section. Important feature down here, if you've been familiar with the purchasing and order entry sections in the transaction definition class, is we need to make sure if you want the ability to create your own unit of measures, which probably going to need to do, especially if you're using inventory, you need to make sure you enable custom units of measure here in inventory. And that also has to be enabled in the order entry and purchasing module, respectively. You need to have them turned on in all three in order for you to have that ability. So as long as you have the enable custom units of measure button here, you'll notice if you pull up your default group, you'll be able to add your own on the fly. If you don't see that, that just means we need to enable it. You're probably going to have to click enable and save out of here. Then you can come back in and edit it. Same thing up on your module menu under inventory. You'll notice under setup, there is a units of measure under more, And if you don't see that plus, that also means you can't add them on the fly. And that'd be the same for order entry and inventory. So you want to make sure you can add these. And you might need to refresh, and you might also need to get security under subscriptions to be able to make that change. So just be aware of that. Sometimes that's a sticking point. So you can do that. And then there's some additional functionality down here. Enable functionality, enable a draft mode. Someone's putting together something in inventory. They don't want to post it yet. You can enable the draft mode. Enable shipping dates and purchasing and order entry. Scanning product in use. So there's just some different buttons you could turn on and off here. You can always hit this little question mark if you need further explanation or options of what you can do in these fields. And then if those don't work as well, back to the help on this page. Okay. So, and then here's one setting: include quantity on order and quantity available. When you can dictate, when you're looking at your inventory, are we going to include quantity available for items that are on order but we have not received yet? So that's just a little optional button you can check off there. We're not going to touch and get into detail on kitting inside inventory. If you need more information on that, that's a Q&A. Take a look at the help here. And, assuming we'll be making some additional videos on that at some point as well for kitting. But you do have the ability to track and establish kits. So you can turn that on there if you need it. One area right underneath that we will touch on a little bit is the ability to track serialization. Tough word to say. But if you need to track serial numbers on your items, if you're selling particular parts like stoves or microwaves, something that has a serial number that you need to track when you're selling it, you could turn that button on, and you'll see when we get into the items, you'll be able to track serialization on that particular item. And the same thing goes for tracking bins, lots, expiration dates. You can turn these on and off here. Additional options. Do I want to turn off negative inventory? Do I want to allow inventory to be negative? And we'll see that function where you can specify it by warehouse as well. But do I want to even have the option? So do I want to turn off negative inventory? I can check that on or off there. And do I want to turn off editing? So you can, again, track all that information. We're going to dive into these areas specifically in the next step. For warehouses, you can get to them right from here as well and set up your warehouse on the fly. We're going to go in next right underneath the menu item here and set up. So, hey, do we want to enable warehouse transfers? So if you have multiple warehouses and you want to transfer between warehouses, you're going to want to enable that or not. And the same thing, if it's something's in transit, we haven't received it yet, but we want to transfer it, do you want to enable that as well? And as you're progressing through your deployment here, you'll recall that we do have number sequence capabilities. So this right here is where you can establish a number sequence for transfers. So if you want to create your own inventory transfer sequences, number sequences system can number it automatically for you. And you can kind of see here, warehouse transfer 1, warehouse transfer 2, and that can be edited. We're not going to enable cycle counts, but you can get more information on that in the help. But this will allow you to do a physical count in cycles. So in that scenario, it only picks a few items at a time. And then you can keep cycling that count throughout the year. Most people just do a full physical inventory. And you have the option to enable landing costs. And what that will do is that'll allow you to add additional costs on your inventory item, like taxes and freight, and it'll build that total cost, including those items, inside your inventory item. And you can determine which definitions, and we'll get into that, are eligible for this. And you can set that all up as well there, but we're going to turn that off for now. And just like every other module and configuration, this allows you to check off which dimensions do you want available for use when entering data. When you're entering information in inventory, what dimensions do you want to be visible? Doesn't mean you have to enter them. It's just, what do I want to be available? I usually recommend turning them all on, and then you can always just not have them on the entry screen. Last section is for replenishment, which we'll get into in a future session next. Basically, do you want to turn on replenishment? And in that scenario, you can establish different methods for your replenishment, demand forecasts, or reorder point. So in this series, we're going to talk about reorder point. And so we're going to turn that on. And what you can do is the system can automatically generate purchase orders based on your reorder points for your items. So you can establish that automatically instead of having to manually go through and create POs for your inventory items. You can have the system do it, and then you can define which default transaction definition those POs should get created in. And that's going to be your list of items here. Then you have an option if you want to replenish an item only for warehouses listed on the item record and so forth. So we'll get into that. That's the configuration tab, the initial one you'll need to go through for inventory control. Just like purchasing and order entry, we have two tabs, general configuration, and then your documents configuration. We'll go into here again in some of the later sessions in this training series. One thing you will notice, especially with your out-of-the-box instance for construction, you're probably going to have a lot of inventory transaction definitions that come with the system by default. What you do want to do is not delete them, but make them inactive. The ones that you don't see yourself using, you just don't need it based on your workflow. I would highly recommend coming into here and checking them off as inactive. They will just simplify your menu a little bit. If I click on all here, this is kind of group nice because there's so many, it gives them in a subgroup. But as you can see here, there's a lot of options in my inventory setup. So you may want to spend some time and go through here and say, you know what, we're not using kits. I'm going to inactivate those. Doesn't delete them. If I ever want to turn them back on, I can click them back on in there in the system here. So I'm going to deactivate that. And let's go. We'll leave the rest of these on for now. So I can hit save. So once you hit save in your configuration, if you did make any changes, I'm going to refresh this and we'll see if that screen looks a little different now. Under inventory control, you no longer see, and now we didn't really see it before, but we had the kit on there that's not showing up there anymore. So that basically is what you need to do initially to get your inventory configured so that you can take it to the next steps. And we're going to go into one more area before this video ends, is after the configuration, we're going to go into warehouse setup. So basically, you can come into here, you can create a new warehouse by hitting the plus button. And I would do this at the top level again, or you can click on your warehouse here, and you'll see a list of warehouses that are already set up in the system. You can just click add. If you have a lot of warehouses, you can import. Most people just set them up. But I'll click on edit here just to show you one that's already in the system. You give it an ID, you give it a name, and you need to associate it with a location/entity. So if you have, for example, one company, Timberline General Construction, has multiple locations here, I might have a warehouse set up for each one of these Texas locations. I might have one for Dallas, Houston, Kansas City. In this case, we just have one set up for GC, and you need to link it to that location. That is required. You will be able to turn on some approvals within inventory. And one of the options for approvals is to approve it by warehouse manager. So right here, you can pull up a list of your employees and select who the warehouse manager is for the Timberline General Construction. You can also tie warehouses to a parent warehouse. So maybe you have multiple buildings, you have a reserve warehouse. Within that, you can establish that parent-child relationship as with any dimension. And really, in Intacct and Inventory, a warehouse is an actual dimension. You're going to be able to report on that in your financial statements. You can list a contact for this warehouse. So if you did have a warehouse contact or, address information you want to store particular to this warehouse, you can set up a warehouse contact address and link it there. And then whether it's inactive or active. And, here's where you're going to say, hey, do we want to do replenishment for this warehouse? And do we want to allow negative inventory quantities for this warehouse? You can turn that on and off. And if you want to track, one of the options in the configuration allowed you to track bin locations. So if that's turned on, you'll have the ability to set up your bin structure for this warehouse. And you can fill out bin IDs, descriptions. You can build zones that you might want to set up within the warehouse, aisles, rows. You're going to set up the whole criteria and structure here within that warehouse. If you don't need that, you can leave that blank. At that point, you're just going to click Save, and that will create your warehouse that we can use later on in the system. So that's going to conclude this segment of the inventory configuration. We'll look forward to you in the next session. Thank you.